Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human. I'm delighted to say I'm here with Deb Dana. She is a clinician, a consultant, a multiple author. There's a great long list of the books that you've written, Deb, on Amazon, and a pioneer in applying polyvagal theory, which we'll get into for those who haven't heard of that term before, to the clinical setting. And I am now possessing of a basic understanding of what polyvagal theory is, having done some reading over the weekend. I can't wait to get into this. I think there's a ton of application, as we were saying off air, not just in the therapeutic context, but in our day-to-day interactions as mums, as dads, as business people, whatever it might be. I think this just provides us with an access to understanding who we are as humans in a way that is not familiar, wasn't familiar to me previously, and so I can't wait to get into this. Thank you for joining, Deb.
Well, I love being here, and I actually love the name of your podcast, Being Human, and I love that we're going to talk polyvagal, because polyvagal really helps us understand the ways we are human and how we can navigate being human in a way that brings perhaps more grace, more ease, more regulation, more kindness, all of those things that we're striving for in our daily lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Deb, could you give us a bit of background, like all the way back? I love to go, right? When did you first start to get, perhaps an interest in how we tick, and and what led you to ultimately becoming a therapist, and then we can move on into polyvagal therapy.
Yeah. I'm now 70, so it's been a long time to go back there and think. I did an undergraduate in social welfare. So, from a very young age, I knew I wanted to be in a helping professional of some sort. I lean towards social work because social work is a systems way of looking at things. And I've always thought we are a system, we are part of systems, and systems are the way to begin to see ourselves and see where we might make a change, and how that small change we make then impacts everything around us. So that led me to working in schools and doing all sorts of different kinds of things until my children, my last one left home to go to college. And I was on my own, and I thought, okay, now's the time. I went back and got my master's in social work, and that's when I really dove into clinical practice. I'd been doing more general systems work in organizations before that. So, yeah, and so that was I was 50 when I did that. So
Okay.
it's that second career, knowing, okay, now's my time. And when I did that, I have always been a neuroscience nerd, so I've always wondered how things work. And so I, studied the brain. I was lucky enough to go into a histology lab with a bunch of other clinicians and get to dissect human brains, which was fascinating.
I was going to ask, what is histology?
Histology lab is a lab where cadavers or parts of cadaver. This one was a brain, had brains, were stored, were held so that people could dissect and see what's going on inside a brain. So it was fascinating. And I say that to people, and some people go, oh no. And other people go, yes, right. I'm one of those that goes, yes. So I knew that. And then, I always taught my clients how their brain worked, because I think it's really important for us to understand how our biology functions. So, as I was doing that, I was getting trained in internal family systems and sensory motor psychotherapy. I did the Bessel's trauma certificate at the Trauma Foundation. So I was doing all this stuff. And then I stumbled on Steve Porges's polyvagal theory. And it was like, a light bulb went off. It was a missing piece of a puzzle for me. And so I reached out to Steve, who back then, this was 2011 maybe. And back then you could just email people and they would say, oh, nice to meet you. Right. So I emailed Steve and I said, fascinated. Would you like to come to Maine, which is where I lived at the time, and do a couple-day presentation for my colleagues? He said, sure. I mean, who doesn't want to come to Kennebunkport, Maine in the summer when it's gorgeous? So he and his wife, Sue Carter, came, and they did a beautiful 2-day presentation for us. And I had already started playing around with how to translate his wonderful science into clinical application. And so, we played around with what I was doing, and he's a lovely human. If you haven't listened to him or met him, try to do that. He's humble,
Okay.
brilliant, and all of those things. And he was very supportive. He said, "I like what you're doing. Keep doing it." And so, I like to say our nervous systems met and decided we were a match.
Right.
Right. So, and from there, look where we are now. It's quite amazing to me to think that it was a life-changing experience really for me, reading his first book and beginning to understand the nervous system. And it's taken me on this journey to translate his brilliant work into clinical application and then beyond into, everyday human experience. Because as you said, we all have a nervous system, right? And we're
Yep.
always engaging with our own nervous system and with other people's nervous systems. You can't get away from that. So I think we might as well understand how they work and understand how we can best come into connection with others, be grounded in our own system, be anchored in regulation, and then offer that to others, because the world is a safer, kinder place when we are in that place of regulation.
Right. 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 Now, this term polyvagal and it's related obviously to the vagus nerve. But maybe we should start there to just lay out what we mean by a nervous system, and then where does this vagus nerve come into play, and then what does polyvagal mean?
Sure. Yeah. So the autonomic nervous system is made up of the parasympathetic and sympathetic branches, right? And until Steve's creation or development of polyvagal theory, we thought it was just these two, and they were, a balance system. One was on, one was off. We went back and forth like on a seesaw. But what Steve discovered
And
is
for people who are not familiar with just that basics, what do we mean by sympathetic and parasympathetic?
so sympathetic nervous system is the part of your autonomic nervous system that brings you fight and flight, which everybody kind of knows that survival strategy. When we're in danger, we run or we fight, right? Parasympathetic nervous system, in the old way of thinking about it, was called the rest and digest system. So we had this survival strategy of fight and flight, or we were in rest and digest. It was one or the other. So Steve's work really identified that, in fact, we have two branches of parasympathetic, two branches of the vagus, hence polyvagal. One does help us be regulated and move into that place of connection and safety, rest and digest, so to speak. And the other, in its survival strategy, takes us to disconnect, collapse, disappear, shut down. And it was
Right.
that sort of understanding that helped all of us trauma therapists understand our clients differently, because not every client has that fight and flight response. Right? Some
Yeah.
clients have the shutdown, collapse, disappear response. We had no way of understanding that through the old way of understanding the biology of the nervous system. So it was a great gift to the therapy world to understand we have this other survival strategy as well.
Yeah. And this is based on the biology of the nerves themselves, right? So just talk us through, how the vagus
Yep,
nerve
sure.
works through the body, and then where it sort of spreads out and so on.
Sure. And let's just start by getting the sympathetic nervous system out of the
Yeah.
way. That is
Yeah.
the spinal nerve system. So it exits the mid part of your back, right? The thoracic and lumbar regions. It exits the sympathetic chain that runs down either side of your spinal cord. So that's a totally different system, but together with these two vagal systems, it creates the autonomic nervous system. So we have
Right.
these things all coming together. The vagus nerve is a cranial nerve system. It exits your brainstem, right? So very different in the way it's created, but works together with sympathetic. So it exits your brainstem, and then we might think of it as a whole bundle of nerves. The vagus is not one nerve, a bundle of nerves. And so if you think about an electric wire that's covered, when you open it up, you see lots of different wires inside. That's like the vagus, right? So
Right.
as it exits the brainstem, it goes to all sorts of places above the diaphragm. That's the ventral aspect. and it goes to lots of places below the diaphragm, including your digestive system. That's the dorsal circuit. So it's this one bundle of nerves that then exits in very different places in many organs. It impacts many organs in our body. So that's why it's called polyvagal, the two vagal branches.
Right. And the ventral means front, and that's
Yeah.
above the diagram up top.
Well, it's interesting
And
because why it was named ventral and dorsal is because in your brainstem, in your medulla, actually, is where the vagus begins. And the first part, the dorsal vagus, the nucleus of the dorsal vagus emerges first as we're growing in the womb, right?
right.
And then later on, many weeks later, the ventral vagus nucleus emerges in front of the dorsal
Okay.
nucleus. So that's really why it's ventral and dorsal, which is fascinating, isn't it? So
Yeah.
our nervous system develops in utero the same way it developed evolutionarily. Dorsal first, then sympathetic, and finally ventral.
Right. Okay. And so, and Vegas has its roots in vagabond and vagrant, right? They're the same.
Wanderer.
They always have the
Wander.
same roots,
Yes.
wandering. Yeah. So,
Yes.
so it wanders all over the body,
It
right?
does. Yeah. Yeah.
So this autonomic nervous system, and autonomic means it's going on without our conscious direction, right?
It's automatic. It works
Yeah.
automatically in the background, and we can also work with it. So thank goodness it does all its work in the background. I don't want to have to remember to breathe every few seconds. I don't want to have to make my heart beat. I don't want to have to digest my food. I want that to happen, and I also want to be able to come to calm. I want to be able to mobilize to run. I want to be able to do these things um, because I need to in the moment, or because I want to in the moment, not just have them working on in the background by themselves. So that's the beauty of polyvagal theory, is that it helps us understand how it works so we can work with it.
Mm. And it's the main premise then of the theory is that one of these is dominant at any one time. Is that right?
Yeah, yes. And all three are always there. Ventral, sympathetic, dorsal are always active in your system. And I think that the way I like to think about it is the one that has the greatest percentage of activity at any moment is the system that is leading the way, right? You're a business guy. You probably use pie charts, right? I
Yeah.
do pie charts all the time. And if I divide my pie chart into sympathetic, dorsal, ventral, whichever is the biggest slice of the pie, is the one that I'm under the influence of in that moment. But there are the other two slices of the pie that are also, at work in my system. So just because I'm in ventral doesn't mean sympathetic and dorsal. And actually what it does mean for ventral, if I'm anchored in ventral in regulation and connection and feeling safe as I'm moving through the world, sympathetic does an everyday function of bringing me energy in a healthy way. And
Right.
dorsal has an everyday function of regulating my digestion. So when I'm in ventral, all three states are working beautifully together. If sympathetic has overtaken my system because it feels I'm in danger, ventral is still there, but it's in the background and it's not regulating me anymore. And for dorsal, my digestion is now out of regulation, right?
Right.
And then in dorsal, if I end up in dorsal, because we go to sympathetic first, right? It's a hierarchy. Ventral's the top. Sympathetic's the next place we go if we need a survival strategy. If that doesn't work, we go to dorsal survival strategy, which is shutdown, collapse, right? And so all of that amazing, chaotic, jumble of energy in sympathetic that drives me has now drained from my system. And I'm in dorsal where I have no energy to do anything. I'm in collapse. Right. So that's the basic hierarchy in the way it works.
Yeah. Yeah. And this doesn't necessarily mean that it's some immediate physical threat that will have us trigger into sympathetic, right? It could be as simple as we start comparing ourselves, someone in our mind in a
Yeah.
social situation, and
Yeah.
now we're in.
Yes. And
So yeah, just sort of
yeah.
illustrate it a bit of the sort of type states that might characterize us being
Yeah.
in any one of those.
Yeah. And comparison is something we humans do all the time. right?
Mm.
And we have that downward comparison where I have to be better than everybody else, or I'm something bad will happen. And that brings that sympathetic anxiety or anger or drivenness that we see so often in people. You find that in business a lot. People are driven, but they can never be nourished by it. They seek but are never satisfied, right?
Yeah.
We're that workaholic. I can't stop. I have to create lists. If you're a list maker, maybe you're a list maker because you're anxious. That's a sympathetic response, right? And then we have an upward comparison, which is the dorsal experience of, I'll never measure up to anyone else, which happens all the time too. It takes us to hopelessness, to despair. Right.
Mm.
We also have a compare when we're in ventral, which is a healthy compare, which is like, oh, I can be curious about how you do things and how I do things. That's where we're heading for. We would like to be there, right? But comparison is because we humans are comparing creatures. We do that all the time. It's a normal part of our world. It's just if you are in a survival compare, then you're not functioning that well. Because as soon as you leave ventral and go to sympathetic and then dorsal, your thinking part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, goes into hypoactive mode, and it no longer helps you in the way you need. You can't problem solve and plan and find options in the way you can when you're in ventral regulation. So comparison is one. Anxiety about having too much to do and not enough time to do it, or having, if you're running a business and you can't find enough employees, or you are an employee and the organization doesn't provide enough help, right? These are all the ways that teachers who are trying to work in really difficult situations with 30 nervous systems in a class, right? Right? And how the
I'd
heck do you
put it like
do you
that.
find that, right? How do you take care of
Yeah.
that? So there are all sorts of ways, traffic, trying to get to work and you get stuck in traffic. Simple things, going to the grocery store and forgetting your list. There are all sort of ways that our nervous system then helps us meet the challenge by bringing us some of that survival energy. And the thing that we can do as humans is we can work with our system so that we stay in regulation longer. We measure in frequency, intensity, and duration. So we will less frequently get dysregulated. There'll be a less intensity around the dysregulation, and it'll not last as long. That's how we're trying to measure change in the nervous system, right? But
Yeah.
if you're a trauma survivor, or even if you are, in a moment in your life when you're feeling overwhelmed, your nervous system is more sensitive to dysregulation, and it doesn't have to be any big thing. Your resilience is low. Something comes at you, right? You've got, 3 cars all looking for the same parking spot and you totally dissolve, right? Or, someone, sends you an email, I need this by the end of the day, and you can't manage it, right? So it doesn't have to be a true danger to my being, but my nervous system, neuroception is what Steve created as how the nervous system takes in information. That's the word neuroception. And so there's a neuroception of unsafety that happens, right? And to talk just a minute about neuroception has 3 pathways where it takes in information. It listens inside your body. So if you are not feeling well, your neuroception is one of unsafety, and it can cause all of these survival energies to emerge. It listens into the environment. So if you think about the environment you're working in, if the environment feels um, disorganized, crowded, too quiet, in some way not meeting your need for what helps you work, nervous system brings a survival response, right? And then it listens to the space between people. So it's listening. My nervous system's listening to your nervous system. And if you think about cultures in organizations, right, there are groups that feel very welcoming and safe and curious and supportive and all that. And then there are other groups. You walk into another group and it feels very different.
Yeah.
right? And your nervous system picks that up and then is going to struggle to keep you in regulation if the cue coming in is this does not feel like a safe place.
Right.
Mm,
Right. And when you're talking about being in regulation, you mean you're in this ventral, you're dominated by ventral, or
yes.
your slice of the pie chart is
Yes.
has the biggest chunk for ventral, and then and in that place I'm curious, I'm productive, I'm
Yep.
engaging in pro-social behaviors,
Yes.
I'm looking for constructive solutions.
Exactly. Yep.
And when you talk about being dysregulated, you neurocept some threat,
Hmm.
and neuroception happens. It precedes perception, right? This is happening before.
Yes. Yeah,
This is happening before we
yeah, and
really have a perception of what's.
we often don't even notice
Yeah.
neuroception. We just move into a survival energy and a survival story, right? I mean, I
Mm,
might not even have the awareness, the perception that I got these cues of danger. I just go into a state of protection, and then I enter a story, and that story becomes the truth, right? Because the
mm,
brain's job is to take the information that comes from the body, and 80% of the information comes, from body to brain, right? From the nervous system, body to brain. The brain's job is to make a story that makes some kind of sense of that. And the story is usually one of being in danger and being in a bad place, and I'm not wanted, I'm not welcome. All of those sort of stories that we just enter into, and then we believe. Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. We move right into protection and we leave connection, because when you leave ventral, it's not that you want to enter into protection. It's not that you no longer want to be curious or want to be, a team member and working collaboratively. It's that your biology no longer allows that to happen. So we want to be sure to remember that it's not my brain making a decision, it's my biology. Right? So it's not a
yeah,
cognitive decision making. It's my physiology saying, you can't do that. It's no longer safe. And when we look at other people, we want to be thinking about that. We're thinking, wow, they don't want to be part of the team. If we could change that to, oh, I think they're dysregulated, it becomes a very different experience.
oh, or they're being an a-hole, or
Uh-huh.
they're not playing ball, or they're not. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So it's rather
But
than
what
being,
another way to look about it is they've moved into fight or flight. They've moved into their sympathetic.
or even they've moved into shutdown collapse, and we judge them as being bored or not caring, right?
Right.
That's the label we put, when really they are so dysregulated, they've gone into collapse, right? No longer
Yeah.
present. It's easier to recognize the person who's sympathetically um, angry or anxious. It's harder to recognize the dorsal collapse, because we sometimes misinterpret that as bored or not caring. So we want to be curious about that. Mm.
Just what brings to mind is sometimes you'll see parents criticized, um, if there's been a death of a child. Oh, that mother, she didn't show enough empathy, or that father.
Yeah.
It's just popped into my head.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of that is somebody who's
Yeah.
really they're in dorsal collapse.
Exactly.
They're shut. They're
Exactly.
they're
Because
is
dorsal is, the most extreme survival response. It's the path of last
mm,
resort for your nervous system. It takes you there and moves you. It has a analgesic numbing response. So we don't, it takes us out of being here when being here is too overwhelming. Right. So again, we want to always, if we can stay in ventral, we can be curious about, I wonder what state that person is in before we make a judgment about them.
right,
Mm.
right, right. And the other thing I picked up in one of your books was how often a tell of somebody who's moved into sympathetic from the ventral is they start jiggling. Right, you start to see
Yeah,
the physical
can't
movement.
can't sit still, looking around. Yeah, it's fascinating to really see that again. We see that clearly. You can see sympathetic when it gets to be too much. Sympathetic, the right degree of sympathetic, when it's working with ventral, right? It's lovely because we move with there's a rhythm to the movement. We can go for a run, we can, exercise, all these things. When sympathetic becomes a survival strategy, the rhythm's lost, right? It's sort of
Ah.
this disorganized. You can
So
see,
it's not that they're moving, it's that we sense it's not in keeping with the activity,
yeah,
right? The
yeah,
jiggling is at one pace and we're just having a
yeah,
exploratory conversation. It doesn't make sense, right?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh, that's yeah, that would make sense. And then like when they've gone into dorsal, it's this person's checked out.
Yeah,
They're not in
yeah,
the
there's
rhythm of the group.
yeah, it's usually an immobilization that happens there and, or a sort of a blank look or nothing happening, the breath slows way down. With clients, with people in therapy, there's often the heads down and the shoulders are slumped. So, it's you can see it, but you can feel it. If you are if you're in a place of regulation, if you're in ventral and you come across someone who's in dorsal, if you're connecting with someone in that state, your nervous system will give you a message, right? If you listen to your nervous system, it's going to feel their nervous system and give you a
Mm,
message. Ooh, something's not right, right? Rather
yep,
than the sympathetic system when it activates is gonna criticize the other person, right? But
right,
ventral is gonna get the feeling, oh, some suffering is happening there. Right? So it's
right,
our job to anchor in ventral as often as we can for as long as we can. And I do wanna say nobody does that all the time. No human
right,
is regulated all the time, nor is that an expectation. So,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Need to
yeah, yeah,
point
yeah,
that out. Yeah.
yeah. And this is the ladder you described, right? The
Yes.
dorsal to sympathetic to ventral, and we traverse this ladder.
Yes.
Uh, so, what are some of the ways then we can bring people up the ladder?
Yeah, that's really the goal for all of us is to figure out our own ways to
Okay.
move up the ladder and then stay in that place of regulation. And what interested me, and I think it came most clearly to mind when the pandemic started, and I started getting all of these emails in my inbox, the 5 things to do to stay safe during, or the 7 things to connect with others, or and I was reading it and I thought there must be something wrong with me because they don't fit for me. I don't want to go out on my porch and have um, you know cocktails with my neighbors at 5 o'clock. I don't want it's not does not appeal to me, right? Nothing was appealing to me, and I finally figured out what I was getting in my inbox was other people telling me what worked for their nervous system, right? And that led me to this place of helping everybody create their own menu, right? Because what works for you and works for me may be very different. We have general categories that we can look at, like movement is a category. Ways of moving can help you begin to bring some energy back to your body if you're in dorsal. Gentle movement, small movement, right? If you come across someone who's in a dorsal collapse and say, well, just get up and go for a walk. Right? It's like, no, 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 your brain is coming up with that, but the nervous system would say, you know, maybe just remember a moment when you had a beautiful walk, right? Before you try to do anything, bringing a memory back is a way of bringing some movement in. In sympathetic, you got a ton of energy, you got all this flood of energy, you got to organize it in some way, right? So maybe you do go for a run there. And in ventral, how do you move in a way that helps you really savor the experience? So movement is one category. I think music is a category, right? That people can find a way to be with music that helps them feel seen, heard, not alone, right? In sympathetic, there are a lot of songs that have that sympathetic, beat and the lyrics and everything, and you feel like, oh, yeah, somebody gets me, right?
Yeah.
And, in dorsal, I live in the States. We think about, country Western music, the dorsal that, my partner left me, I've lost everything. But you can be with it in a different way, right? So I have people create playlists, the playlists that bring the music alive for you. So nature is a wonderful
And
regulator.
just to touch
Yeah.
on music there. So if I'm in dorsal, right, and
Mhm.
and I want to listen to a country song, and
Mhm.
the dog's left, and
Mhm. Yeah,
all
right.
the rest, and uh, isn't that just going to like reinforce my state? How's that going to help me move up the ladder?
Well, there's lovely research on music that it has a paradoxical effect that we can be with dysregulated states, whether that's anger, anxiety, or collapse, despair, and actually be with it, feel not alone, and actually enjoy it. That's what the research says about music. Don't you love that? Right.
Yeah,
And music I love because if I've already created my playlist and I've had fun creating the playlist, right? Then when I need it, I just push a button, right?
mm,
Because when I need a resource, there are moments when I can't think and I don't have the energy, but I can push a button because I've already done all the work before. And that's what I want people to do with their menus. Do your menu, pre-plan all your resources and have ones that are easy to reach for, like remembering or pushing a button, and other ones that take a little more energy, like actually going out your front door and heading out of your house. We need a range of resources so that there's always something that could fit the moment, right?
yeah. That just I can immediately think of times when I've wanted something, and in my head I've known, oh, it would be great to go for a walk there. That would really help, but it's just
Yes.
too much of a leap. But I'm just imagining now, had I
Yeah.
had a
Yeah.
playlist, right,
Yeah.
that may have
Yeah.
made a difference.
Yeah. Nature is a wonderful activator of ventral regulation. So maybe you have nature sounds, maybe you have nature out your window, maybe you get out into nature, maybe you have pictures of your favorite places. I mean, there are all sorts of ways to do this besides actually having to go out and go for a
Mm.
walk, right? So, there there are just so many ways, and people are so creative. Like if I asked you what would be a resource you might reach for, you're going to come up with something that I have no idea about. Like, what would you reach for? What would be a resource you might reach for that?
Uh, hmm. Yeah,
I mean, sometimes a cup
uh,
of tea, cup of coffee, favorite food.
yeah, a cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
A cup of tea could be one. Um, I mean, I've been getting into these like um, the the yoga poses that you
Yeah,
can just do sat down, right?
beautiful.
There's
Yep.
this, the legs up the wall pose is one,
Oh,
which is a bit of a stretch, right? Because you've got to actually move and put your legs up the wall. But that is
that's
a
a yep.
does
Yeah,
wonders for me.
yeah, and I love that
Um,
one because it's not like you're still lying on the floor.
yeah,
But you have but it's all supported. So it's
yeah,
easy enough to reach for. That's beautiful. Yeah. See that's not on my list, but it might move on to my list because that sounds good, right?
yeah.
You know
Or just this one I quite like, where you just the
Yep.
stretching
Oh,
your arm
yes.
out,
Yeah.
bending your back. That's when you could. That's like
That
a scintilla of
you could
energy
reach for that
required.
one. Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and I think part of the fun is in creating your menu, and you create your menu when you don't need it. Right. So you
right.
pre-plan. Right. And sometimes, I had clients who wanted my voice, and so I would record a message for them on their phone. They could just push. Some clients wanted a card written that they could just grab a card. Right. So there are all sorts of that, and that's in the sort of connecting with others category. So how might you want to have resources to connect with others when you don't feel like you could actually email someone or call someone or be with someone, right? So there are other ways of doing that. And then, I have a person in my life who I have a couple of people actually who I can just send an emoji and they know.
Okay.
We have this emoji sort of shorthand, and they know, and they'll send me something back. That's
Right.
doable for me, right? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. 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 Um, that makes sense. I don't even have to write a word out.
exactly, exactly. Yes, right,
And that brings a little bit of social connection, a bit of and
exactly.
you talk about that, the social engagement,
Yes,
that's an important way to
yes.
have us ascend the ladder.
Yeah, and social connection is so vital for we humans, and it can feel overwhelming in dorsal. And in sympathetic, we can be driven to and need, but not be able to have that need met. So we want to find all sorts of ways, and people who we've had the conversation with. Like if I sent my dorsal emoji to people who had no idea what I was doing, they would not know how to respond. But I've
Yeah.
had this conversation with a couple of close friends, and they know when Deb says that emoji, she's just letting us know she's, sort of in that disconnected, hopeless place and just doesn't want a lot back because that will overwhelm. So they just send me
Yeah.
back a smiley face or something, right? Just, I'm here. It's
Yeah.
okay. Right. Because in dorsal, we're very sensitive to too much, and sympathetic. We need someone to show up and say, let me help you organize this crazy energy, right?
Right.
So it's very different what I need from my my resourcing people. And they need to know where I am so they know what to offer, right?
And that's really important, isn't it? That just because we ourselves might be in ventral, and I can relate to this, where there's been experiences where I've been feeling grounded and really well regulated, and somebody around me is in full on sympathetic, and my first instinct is to say, just be grounded like me. Can't you just get some perspective
Right.
and and just chill out?
Yeah, and if you
But
try that, I imagine you got a very different response than what you were thinking. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we have to remember that again, we do not have access to that beautiful grounding that you were talking about when we're in sympathetic.
Mm,
that door is closed, right? So I need
yeah.
somebody to help me find a way to open that door again, which is not telling me just be grounded or, you know, just get over it. I mean, don't we say that so much? What's the big
Yeah.
deal? Just get over it. Well, it may not be
Mm,
a big deal to your nervous system, but to mine, it's a huge deal, right? Something goes wrong, and I forget to get the milk on the way home, and I have a meltdown when I get home, and you go, "Oh, it's no big deal." It's a big deal to my nervous system,
yeah.
right? And so what I need you to do is say, "Oh, I get how this is really challenging for you right now. What do you need?" Right?
Yeah. What do you need? Can I get you some milk? Or can
Right.
I go run and get the
Right.
milk? Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Match the
Meet me
nervous
where
system.
I am. Don't
Yeah.
don't assume. As soon as you assume that your system is giving you the information that my system should have, then we're no longer in an autonomic conversation, which I think is where we need to be, right? And I just use the word should, is whenever we use the word should, we're not in a ventral state of regulation and curiosity. Should is not a curious word, right?
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's a sympathetic. It's like,
it
do
is.
this action.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah, yeah.
Um, and actually, that may be what someone needs if they're in sympathetic sometimes, right? Just, well, you should do this, right? Maybe a bit of direction
Yeah, yeah, I
or
just
not.
wouldn't use should, but yes, I need, let's try this. What do you think? Because the
Right.
nervous system always needs an invitation, not a demand. As
Okay.
soon as it feels like a demand, you're going to get pushed more into survival. But an invitation, what do you think? Can we try this? I'll go with you. Those sort of things. Invitation, yes. Should do this is a demand, and the nervous system will have a very different response. Yeah. Yeah.
And is there a time for direction then, and should? Because I've definitely been in situations where some people have given me feedback and said, "Actually, Richard, I wish you'd just given us a bit more direction in that context."
Yes. And so that takes us to choice. And choice is so important for the nervous system. But the right amount of choice is what we're talking about. In ventral, I probably want to let's do a big brainstorming, and let's say, and anything's on the table. In sympathetic, I need you to give me a concise menu, right? Here are like three
Right.
options. Where do we go? Right? Or
Right.
four or whatever. But not one, because one's not enough, but not unlimited. And in dorsal, I probably need you to be very, kind and gentle and directive, because I am totally lost, right?
Right.
Totally lost. That's where I need you to say, we're going to do this and see what happens.
That
Right?
makes so much
Yeah.
sense. That well,
Yeah.
just from a business context, when I've been in situations, uh, in a senior position, and I have had the feedback, no, we wanted you to be more directive, and I can see, just as you described that, those were situations where the people I was formerly in charge of were feeling lost and
Yes.
confused. And
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's
yeah,
like when I'm in dorsal, if somebody says, what do you think would help you? It's like, why are you asking me that? I'm so gone. I couldn't possibly answer that question. Right.
right.
But you say, let's just try sitting together and feeling connected. Then you're offering me something. You're not saying, what do you think? My
Mm.
brain's not there. I can't think. Don't.
But you're offering me like one thing I can say yes or no to.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And we can just see what happens. Right?
right.
Yeah, yeah. And in sympathetic, I probably have a jumble of things going on, and I need organization. So give
Right.
me, we could do this, this, or this. What do you want to do first? Right? That sort of thing.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and as you say, in ventral, it's we can be much more exploratively together. Let's explore
Hmm.
this situation together and figure something out.
Right. Ventral is where we're creative. Right. We can't be
Mm.
creative in a survival state. We are simply trying to survive. Right. And once we return to ventral, then we can reflect on what happened, right? That's where we can be informed by our survival responses. We don't want to forget they happened. We want to revisit them and reflect on them, but we can't do it when we're in them, right? And then
Mm.
in ventral, we can be really creative. We're collaborative, we're creative, we're curious, all those things that you need to really, build something together and move in a new direction. Yeah.
Right. And I had in my notes here, as a potentially as another category is art and creativity. Now we've just talked about it in the context of ventral, but across the ladder, what's the role there?
Yeah, so I think we truly um we can't be creative unless we have a critical mass of ventral, right? I don't have to be fully immersed in it, but I have to have enough ventral regulating me so that I feel safe and can feel vulnerable enough to be creative and do all that,
Mm.
bring it out into the world. I think art, if we viewing art can be again a lot like music, right? We can really feel our sympathetic and dorsal survival energies when we are looking at certain kinds of art, right? Certain sculptures, certain paintings, and we can again be with those survival energies in a different way, right? I think people talk to me sometimes and they say, I think I create better when I'm dysregulated. And I say, well, I'm not sure that's true. I think you have you have a toehold in ventral, and then you dip into your survival energies. And there's that lovely, integration between energies that then helps you, create in whatever way. I think, you
Mm.
might think about that in business too, that you feel you need enough drive to
Yeah.
move forward, and yet we can be alert and productive and successful from ventral, but when we move into sympathetic without ventral, we're alarmed and we're driven in a different way, and we
Yeah.
can be very driven. We can look really successful, but we suffer as a human. Right? We don't find joy in life. We don't have relationships that nourish us. And that's because we're in survival. Where the belief is, if I don't keep doing this, if I don't keep working this hard or doing these things, something bad will happen. Whereas in ventral, wow, I am doing these things, because good things come and it's enjoyable. That's where we want to be. That's when we do good things in the world, when we build good things, when our employees feel safe, feel um, taken care of, feel part of, right? When I teach, and when Steve and I first started, we did a edited book together, and we started gathering authors for the book from all sorts of different, ways of working, but they could bring polyvagal in, and we started what Steve called our polyvagal family, right? And now every time I teach, I say, you're part of our polyvagal family now, right? You're welcome to the community. That's what I think businesses need to do. They need to create community, right?
Yeah.
That people feel safe and they can trust that they will be treated with respect, right? And these were all ventral qualities, right? So
Yeah.
if the culture is one of regulation, top down, bottom up, both from CEO down and employees on up, if everybody is working from this understanding of the nervous system, then I think it's a very different world that we enter into every day.
Yeah. And I think it's fascinating to start to think about diagnosing, if you like, conditions in business through this lens. Because right now we'll talk about employees being disengaged and having no satisfaction in what they're doing at work. But to think about it in terms of regulation might be a very powerful way of,
Yes, yeah.
of addressing this
Yeah,
situation.
yeah, because what we're really saying, if we're labeling someone as disengaged, what we're saying in a nervous system level is their nervous system is neurocepting more danger than safety, right? And
Right.
so they cannot come into a place of engagement and cooperation and collaboration. They're biologically unable. In the therapy world, whenever a client is struggling or the therapy stalls, we always look here, right? It's not my client's job to make it safe enough to engage in therapy. It's my job. So in the
Yeah.
business world, I would encourage the same. Look in your own and say, what am I not doing, or what can I do differently to make it safe enough for my employees to engage, to show up, to be a part of, right? Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. Um, Mindfulness and grounding. Where does that play its role here?
Yeah, it's interesting because the research on meditation is profound, right? It brings us physical and psychological well being, and yet meditation is very challenging for many people, right? So coming into extended periods of mindfulness can be really challenging for a nervous system. So I like to talk about mindful moments, right? Because we
Right.
want awareness. We want to bring perception and awareness to what's happening in our nervous system. So that kind of awareness, yes. And then mindful moments when I'm really, sitting, taking in, being present, but I'm not feeling the demand to make it into a long practice. Right.
Right.
And I think that again is the question we're always asking, short practice, long practice, dipping in, sitting for a half hour, what works for your nervous system, right? I love to tell people there's no right or wrong way. There's just the way of your nervous system. And when you remember that, you follow your nervous system, it takes you exactly where you need to go.
It's fascinating. I'm just relating it to my own experience with meditation. So for decades, I try meditation. I can never get a practice, but with over the last sort of probably 5 to 6 years, I've had some major breakthroughs in terms of dealing with resolving my own underlying trauma, and now I've got a meditation practice, which was just impossible. I could maybe, like, a minute was hard.
Right.
You know,
Right.
15 years ago, if I managed a minute of meditation, that was some major
Right.
achievement. But
Right. Yeah.
that would make a lot of sense. My nervous system just wasn't ready to try and
Right.
do 20 minutes
It felt
sitting
it
alone.
felt to the nervous system that was a cue of danger, because when we begin to get quiet, when we begin to come into
Mm.
stillness, it opens the door for everything that's underneath to be felt, to be heard, to be seen, right? And if all of that underneath is scary, why would the nervous system let you sit, right? What
Yeah.
and now that you've done a lot of your own work, the scary stuff is not sitting there waiting to overtake you, and you can have a meditation practice, right? So you did it in the right order. You took care of that, and now you can sit. That's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That makes. And so often happens on this podcast, you end up learning stuff. You're like, oh man, I wish I'd known that 20 years ago. But
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. I know. I say that a lot. I say, "Oh, I wish I'd known this back then. I would have done something differently." Yes. I
yeah.
apologize to my kids all the time. It's like, I didn't know back then what I know now. Yeah.
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 sense. Connection rituals is another thing I've made a note of. Yeah, what's the role of rituals?
Ritual is a because what I would say is the nervous system loves predictability. Right? When things are
Mm,
predictable, we can count on them. It adds a layer of safety. And so ritual is a way of bringing that predictability in. And again, we create our own rituals, right? Because what works for you maybe not work for me. I have a Sunday morning Zoom conversation that I've had with a friend for years now, right? It's a ritual I count on wherever we are in the world. Doesn't matter. Time zone doesn't matter. We find way to make it work. And that's a ritual for me. I have a morning message with my two daughters where we just send a quick good morning back and forth. It's a ritual I count on, right?
yeah.
So I imagine you have a ritual in your world that you count on.
Well, yeah. I mean, in terms of connection rituals, yes. I mean, every Monday I walk my boys to school. Every
Oh,
Thursday I also do that. Right.
yeah. There
We
you go.
cycle or we walk. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
So there is a.
Yeah.
But yes, you're absolutely right. There's something to be said about systematizing it
Yeah.
and having it be a regular. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
The fact that I know it's my turn is Monday and Thursday, and they're blocked out in the diary, and sort of my universe shifts
Right.
around those.
Right.
I take my kids swimming every Saturday,
Love
right?
it.
So
So and it's
yeah.
bringing awareness and attention to those, right? So they don't it's not that
Mm.
they just happen, but we then really celebrate that they happen. We savor. That makes the ritual, really, brings it into awareness and makes it a stronger experience for us.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking of the Whole Foods that they start their meetings with this check-in ritual where everybody gets a minute, what's going on, what's on your mind, let's check in.
Yeah.
Um, and and as I've mentioned on this podcast before, a friend of mine who runs a business on the hour, every hour, they play classical music in the office for a minute, and it's an invitation for everybody to meditate for a minute.
Interesting.
Uh, but again, ritualizing
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
I would be
the
ask your friend, I'd be curious if he polled his employees, how many of them find that inviting and how many of them find that, um, off-putting.
annoying.
Yeah, I mean,
Not bark again.
it's interesting, because for me, I'd love it. I love classical music. Other people would be, "Can we not have a variety of music?" Right?
Right.
Because some nervous systems will go, "No, thank you." Again, it's when we start looking at individual nervous systems, we have to start thinking, how do we invite every nervous system in? And that's really hard to do. It's hard to
Yeah.
do, right?
Well, I guess that's the challenge of a connection ritual with multiple human beings.
Yes.
How do you have it work for
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
for
Yeah.
everyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But nonetheless, I can still see the value of
Absolutely. Yeah.
having it, and maybe there's a case for it looking and feeling different,
Mhm.
yeah, each time depending on exactly what's going on for
Yeah.
the group.
Yeah. I mean, maybe Mondays is classical and Tuesdays is folk and Wednesdays, I don't know. I mean, it's just interesting to be, and
Yeah.
I say this because I have often been the nervous system that has felt like I'm a misfit. Right.
Right.
And if you've had that experience of being in a group where everybody looked like they were enjoying something and your nervous system went, "Oh, no, thank you." You feel like a misfit if there's not room for the people who don't want to be in the big group dancing or, everybody, sharing a memory or whatever it is, right? There has to be room for the nervous system that says, not today, thank you. Right. And not feel like
Mm.
you're a misfit, not feel like you're broken. There's something wrong with you. So that's why when we, think about the nervous system, we want to think, how do we make room for every nervous system?
Yeah. And I'm just thinking it might not be that we can just ask someone, "Hey, what would be the ritual or the setup of this particular interaction
Hmm.
that's going to have you feel safe or
Hmm.
help you step up the ladder in this context."
Hmm.
we can't just ask people, can we? Right?
Well,
Sometimes is it?
maybe sometimes we can. I mean, we can try something out and say, so just did that feel welcoming, or was that a warning
Mm,
on a biological level? Not your brain, but in your body. Did you feel like, oh, this I like this, or no thanks? Right? You can make it really
uh,
simple, and you begin to
right, really simple. Yeah,
get a reading on it. And I often offer a bunch of different things. Like I will show a bunch of different images and say, which ones were you drawn towards and which ones did you want to get away from? Because you're helping people begin to know their nervous system and be able to tell you what's happening for them. So I think it's a
yeah,
nice way to kind of begin to befriend. I call it befriending, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And having that range of options. I'm thinking of in terms of my professional experience of working with groups, and there was one group I was working with over time, and there was one individual in this group. No matter how interactive I attempted to design the sessions, she just wouldn't engage. Even if it was simple as writing something on a post-it and stick
Mhm.
it on a wall without asking her to speak, she still would not engage in anything. And then we tried using Lego Serious Play, where you have people build
Mm.
Lego models to express themselves, and she completely came alive in this session,
Right.
and nothing else. But in the terms we're seeing it now, I can see that for all of those sessions, she was like, yeah, dorsal dominant, and
Mhm.
then there
Mhm.
was just something about that mode of expression
Right. That
that
one.
had her get into
Right.
a little bit of
That one felt
sympathetic.
welcoming to her nervous system,
Mm,
and the others felt
mm,
like a warning, right?
right.
Right. So you shifted the safety danger equation. It's always an equation. The cues of safety have to outweigh the cues of danger, and then we move forward and engage. But when the cues of danger outweigh the cues of safety, we move into survival, right? And so whatever you
Yeah,
did with the Lego, it shifted that safety danger equation for her system.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But if I'd had said to her, "Hey, I notice you're not really kind of engaging in these sessions. Do you what do you think we should do?" I don't imagine she has said, "Well, let's start playing with Lego," right? So
No, probably
there's a
not.
role
Right.
for experimenting with, as
Exactly.
you're saying, like whether it's with different pictures or
Yeah.
different technique. It's how to provide that
Yes. And
ability, that
yeah,
choice.
and to, for you, you're saying you were trying really hard to make the sessions interactive. You know, name that up front, and
Mm,
naming that we're going to try a whole bunch of different things because not everybody will respond to any of them. So
yep.
putting it out there that the expectation is some people are going to like this and not like this, and that's normal. Right? So
Right.
we notice, we name, we normalize, and then we have a better shot at people, being able to engage.
So yeah, even that just framing of it says to people, "Oh, okay, it's safe to not join in here or not say anything or not be interactive, right?
Mhm,
Or not respond to
mhm,
this." Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's safe, it's normal, right? And you can use some of your own. I always use my own experience and say, so for instance, you know, here's an experience where everybody else in the room looked like they were having a really good time, and I was trying to get out the door because it felt so unsafe to my system, right?
Yeah.
To say it happens to all of us, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. The question I had, again, as relates to my own experience with this, is having read this book, I mean, I related with being in dorsal a lot.
Yeah.
And interestingly, one of the things you wrote in the book, which really resonated, was that when we're in dorsal, we can't hear
Mm.
human voices, right? We're primed to listen for sounds of threat, and then we actually tune out of human voices. And I was diagnosed deaf as a kid
Really?
and then they took me to the
Yeah.
specialist, and they did all the tuning fork thing, and the specialist like, no, this kid can hear fine.
Yeah.
And I suspect it was because I was so shut down.
Yeah.
I literally couldn't hear the teacher's voices, and
Right.
or weren't able to tune into them.
Right.
And yet I was really sociable as a kid, right? I had tons of friends. I I never had a problem socially. So what I was kind of left with was interesting, was that I seemed to somehow be moving between
Mhm.
dorsal and
Eventually.
ventral,
Yep.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
I could quite make sense of it. I wasn't like permanently shut down as a kid,
Right.
but I definitely related to being a shut down kid somehow.
Well, I I too was like that. I call it our home away from home. One of the survival states is where we go most often when our system feels under threat. And that's your home away from home. So my home away from home also was dorsal, which doesn't mean I was always there, but it meant when it felt like it was a dangerous world to my nervous system, I went to dorsal, which sounds like
Right.
what you did. And then when it felt like it
Mhm.
was safe enough to come out and play, you were social and engaged and had lots of friends and moved through the world from that place. Right. But if you went
Right.
back and thought about the moments when you couldn't hear, when not taking in with the teachers, and we went back and identified what are all the cues of danger, you'd probably begin to get an idea of, oh, here's what was going on. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would make sense. There were just certain cluster of
Yep.
cues which
Yep.
flip me into that state.
And
Yeah.
then, and once we start doing that, it's easier for us to do that over and over, right? That we lean more towards, oh, here's that cue that has regularly taken me to dorsal. I hear the cue. I'm just going there now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that would make sense. Um, that would make a lot of
I
sense.
love your experience though about going to the specialist who said he can hear perfectly well, right? And then
Yeah, and that was the I'm sorry, I just
yeah,
lost my train of thought. My other thought was and then, of course, what happened to me as a kid, "Oh, he's the kid who doesn't concentrate,
exactly,
he can't," and I was
exactly,
kinda ashamed for it. He's always checking out, he's on
exactly,
Cloud Cuckoo Land, and I
exactly.
sort of integrated as my identity as that was, I suppose, my defense was, "Yeah, okay, I'm a bit of a dreamer, that's kinda who I am,"
Hmm.
right? And I just sort of somehow managed to accommodate it.
Yes.
But I can now see that through this yeah, if my teachers would understand all of this theory, it might have been very different.
Right. They could figure out, so I wonder what the cues of danger are that we could reduce, and what are the cues of safety we could bring in so that he could actually, hear, right? He could actually take in information. I love that you went to I'm a dreamer rather than, I'm stupid or don't care. Right? That's beautiful.
Right,
That's
yeah.
because that's where often kids go. Right? I'm too stupid, I just don't care. I love that you went to I'm a dreamer. That's beautiful.
Yeah, maybe
Mm.
that was good, a lot better than
Yep.
yeah, because it didn't cause me self-esteem issues.
Love it.
It definitely caused me other issues, right? Because I literally couldn't hear the teacher half the time, but yeah.
Right. Yes.
But now I understand why I couldn't hear them.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, brilliant. Okay, there's so much on my mind, but I talking about, um, connection rituals, I picked the boys
You
up
have
on
to go.
Monday, so
Yes.
it's my turn.
It's your turn.
So
It's important. Yeah. Yeah.
Deb, thank you so much. This has been, fantastic. Um, and thank you for really working with me to relate this to other contexts outside of obviously where you work most of the time, which is with other therapists. So,
Absolutely. I love that you're taking it into the business world. I think it belongs in all. I think every human needs to understand this because it will change how we navigate the world. So thank you for the work you're doing.
no, no, thank you.
Mm,
Yeah, I imagine all of the team leaders out there and the managers and the
mm.
you know, executives
Yes. Yes.
equipped with this could be
Amazing.
yeah, show up
Amazing.
very differently and be much more effective because this is all about building better relationships, having people be more creative, having people make bigger contributions. It's all in service of
Absolutely.
what people in business, are committed to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll put links to your to your books.
Mm.
Where else might you
Um,
send people who want to go further with?
my website, rhythmofregulation.com, and we're doing a redesign, but you can still go to the website now and have the old design. Kind
Yeah.
of, I don't know. It's interesting to redesign, isn't it? And see
Mm,
what represents me now. So stay tuned to that. But at the moment, you can come and lots of resources and materials there. Yeah,
rhythmofregulation.com.
yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Put that out.
Beautiful.
Okay,
All
well,
right.
thanks once again, Dev. This has been awesome.
It's been
Really
fun.
appreciate your time.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.